Bismillahir-Rahmanir-Rahim. The status of Hadeeth in Islam. Through the Quranic and historical perspective. How were Ahadith compiled? How did these Ahadith reach us? What is their status in Deen?
What is the mutual relationship of the Quran and
Ahadith? Ghulam Ahmad Parwez. Muhammad Aslam Jairajpuri. 3. Development of Ahadith. This article was written by Allama Hafiz Muhammad Aslam Jairajpuri. Rasulullah had repeatedly said with great emphasis that whosoever tells lies intentionally about me, should make hell his abode. This hadith has been narrated by so many Sahaba that some of the narrators of Ahadith have claimed it to be mutawatir. Continuous. In spite of this warning, there were people who started inventing false Ahadith during that same period. Mullah Ali Qadri has written in Mawzu'at-e-Kaaba referring to Ost of Imam Tibrani and Kamil of Ibn Adi, the 2 miles distant from Medina. In Hayy Bani Lais, a man sent a proposal of marriage to a woman which was rejected by her elders.
Then that man, wearing a dress like Rasulullah's, went there and said that the messenger has gifted me this dress and has given me the authority to make whatever decisions I wish about your women.
Those people said, "We bow before the order of Rasulullah." Having said this, they lodged him in a house and sent 2 men to verify this from Rasulullah himself. Hearing this, Rasulullah became very angry and ordered an answer to go and kill him and then burn him. When that answer reached there, he found that the man had died of a snake bite.
He burnt his body and returned. Sheikh Zahir Jazairi writes,
the people lied about Rasulullah even during his lifetime. And during the period of the Sahaba there were renegades and hypocrites. 3.1 The period of Sahaba. Companions. The Sahaba were ordered by Rasulullah that, "Do not write anything from me except the Quran, and whoever has written anything other than the Quran should destroy it." The scholars have written that the reason this order was given was for the protection of the Quran so that nothing else could be wrongly mixed up with it.
But in reality this was not the reason, otherwise Rasulullah would have given the order to write the Quran and the narration separately.
On the contrary,
the purpose in forbidding this was so that people did not become immersed in narrations, because once the process of narrations begins, then along with truth, lies also start spreading. Therefore,
this was the reason that even during the first caliphate of Hazrat Abu Bakr, people started disputing about narrations, and when he saw this he collected the people and informed them that today you differ over narrations, but a time will come when you will differ to an even
greater extent.
Therefore, do not ascribe any narration to Rasulullah. Hazrat Abu Bakr had also written a collection of about 500 ahadith. But finally he took them from Hazrat Aisha and burnt them. Because a thought occurred to him that it is possible that I may have considered someone trustworthy and written some narrative from him, and in reality he may not be trustworthy. It cannot be said that in this collection of his there were such ahadith which he wrote after hearing them from other people. Because he himself was a very close member of the company of Rasulullah and heard with his own ears what Rasulullah said, and in which he had no room for doubt.
But since he observed with his own eyes the differences arising in the narrations, he stopped people from this through his position of being the caliph of Rasulullah, and he did not want therefore to leave his own collection of ahadith for others either. From a narrative of Hazrat Abu Hurairah quoted in Sahih Bukhari, it appears that Abdullah bin Amr bin Aras had also kept some sayings of the Messenger which he had written, but this collection also could not be found. It is not known whether it was lost or whether, like Hazrat Abu Bakr, he also burnt it. All the trouble was due to the hypocrites who heard one thing and reported another. After Rasulullah during the time of the Sahaba, there were groups of apostates as well as hypocrites.
This is why Hazrat Abu Bakr forbade people from narrating ahadith, and when some trustworthy Sahaba referred to narratives, he asked for evidence. Hazrat Umar stopped the practice even further in his time and forbade people from indulging in narrations.
If someone narrated a saying, he would not let him go until he was able to provide a witness. But despite this, narrations spread, and if there were some people who said true factual narrations, there were others also who invented lies.
It is written in Sahih Muslim that Bashir bin Ka'b started narrating ahadith in front of Hazrat Ibn Abbas, who did not even raise his eyes. Bashir asked, "What is the reason that you are not listening to my ahadith?" He replied that there was a time when if someone narrated a saying of Rasulullah, we would hurry towards him and listen with all ears. But since the day people have started quoting all sorts of narrations, we have left ahadith. This was the reason that most of the companions of the Messenger stopped narrating ahadith. When Ibn Abi Layla asked Hazrat Zayd bin Arqam to narrate a hadith of Rasulullah, he replied, "I have become old and forgetful." Hazrat Zubair's son Abdullah requested him to narrate a hadith of Rasulullah. He too replied in the same way. Sayyid bin Yazid says that I accompanied Hazrat Sa'd bin Malik from Makkah to Medina but did not hear a single narration from him. Imam Shabi says that I remained in the company of Hazrat Umar for 1 year but he never narrated a single hadith. 3.2 The later period. After the period of the Sahaba, the number of liars and inventors of ahadith continued to increase. According to Allama ibn Jawza, the causes for the increase are as follows. 1. There were some people overwhelmed with piety who made mistakes in memorizing and narrated one thing for another. 2. Some scholars lost their memories and were forced to narrate whatever came to their minds. 3.
A lot of credible narrators whose intellects
were weakened due to old age narrated wrong sayings. 4. There were also such people who deliberately narrated wrong narratives. And later, despite being made aware of their mistake, considered it below the dignity to rectify it. 5. To eradicate Sharia, Zanadika invented false ahadith. 6. When religious dissension was born, and sects such as Shia, Sunni, Qaji, Qadri, Jami, Marjia, Mutazila came into existence, the people of every sect at that time developed their own sets of ahadith to support their own viewpoints in rivalry with the others.
7.
There were a lot of pious people who intentionally developed ahadith for the purpose of attracting people to good deeds and to scare them from bad deeds. According to Ibn Jawza, these people considered Shariat as incomplete and tried to complete it through these narrations. 8. There were certain people who considered it justifiable to develop certifications for each likable quote and then to attribute it to Rasulullah. 9. The courtiers and close confidants of Salatans, caliphs, invented narrations according to their benefactors' wishes and made it a means to get closer to them. Storytellers, preachers and narrators used to attribute all sorts of tales to Rasulullah and the Sahaba, as this was their only marketable asset.
These are the 10 causes due to which false and manufactured narrations were spread among Muslims.
Moreover, political parties wanted to indoctrinate the hearts of the people through the use of deen. They invented ahadith and disseminated them from east to west. And on top of that, those people who wanted to influence the hearts of the people through their knowledge and piety, kept inventing new ahadith.
In his book Tazkirat al-Mawzu'at, Sheikh Muhammad Tahir Gujarati says that a Hadeeth repented during the latter part of his life. At that time he told the people to accept ahadith only after due scrutiny, because when we used to see something to our liking, we made it a hadith.
i.e., we attributed it to Rasulullah. There were others who declared false narratives
with no fear.
Some did it for the personal grandeur while others did it thinking it to be sawab. some reward in the hereafter, or jihad. In this connection, Nuh bin Abi Maryam invented ahadith to augment a surah of the Quran which were quoted by Mufassirin, those involved in the exposition of the Quran, and which are noted especially by Bezavi in his tafsir. When the Imams of ahadith researched into this, Nuh bin Abi Maryam accepted that he had invented these himself so as to attract people towards the Quran.
This was the situation of most narrators who developed ahadith for reasons of piety and to tempt the people.
Preachers and storytellers used to do this with audacity and impunity.
3.3 Abundance of unreliables.
When such a profusion of narrators arose that their translations were written in dozens of volumes, it is obvious how abundant the invented ahadith would have become. The saying of Aqili has been quoted by Mullah Ali Qadri in Mawzu'at-e-Kaaba, that Zanadika invented 12,000 ahadith. Sheikh Muhammad Tahir writes in his Tazkirat al-Mawzu'at that Jonabazi, Ibn Akasha and Muhammad bin Taman Farabi invented more than 10,000 ahadith.
He writes about Ibn Abi Aluja that when he was being taken to be killed, he said that he had invented 4,000 ahadith in which he had been making halal to haram and haram to halal.
What to say about narrations? Some narrators have authored complete books of narrations which were wrong from beginning to end. On page 8 of Tazkirat al-Mawzu'at the following has been noted. Of the books on ahadith, there are certain books whose complete narrations are invented, including the book by al-Khazai, and then Arba'un and Duaniya. Not one hadith in these is correct. Apart from the first hadith in the book called Wasa Ali, all the rest are wrong. The compilation of 300 ahadith of the Masnad of Uns Basri is all wrong. Ibn A'adi has written that Musa bin Ja'far has created a book which was the compilation of 1,000 ahadith based on the narrations of his ancestors, which was passed on to Hazrat Ali. On hearing all of these ahadith, Dar-Qutni said that this book is a compilation of inventions, lies and fabrications. May Allah send his curse on the author of this. He had even narrated sayings regarding consensus and the method of consensus that was linked to the wills of Hazrat Ali. Welmi has written that the book Kitab al-Uruz, written by Abu al-Fazl Ja'far bin Muhammad Husseini, is wrong and untrustworthy. And Imam Zabi writes that Ibn Ishaq bin Ibrahim has compiled a book based on narrations from his father and grandfather which is most certainly not worthy of being referred to. 3.4 Invented books. At the time when scrutiny of ahadith started taking place,
while attempting to evaluate the fabricators, the scholarly imams dealing with this verification and assessment process also sifted through and eliminated their narrations. And they prepared compilations of the ones which according to them were proved to be correct.
I am noting the books which are famous among them as follows.
Book author.
Kitab al-Abatil Abu Abdullah al-Hussein. Died in 542 A.H. Al-Mawzu'at al-Kubra. 4 volumes. Abu al-Fajr Abdur Rahman bin Jawza. Died in 597 A.H. Muqtaza al-Mawzu'at Imam Safarini.
Al-Lali al-Masnu'a.
Fil Ahadith al-Mawzu'a Jalalu ud Din Suyuti. Tazkirat al-Mawzu'at Sheikh Muhammad Tahir. Gujarat, India. Assassinated in 986 A.H. Risalatan-e fil Mawzu'at Raziyad din Sanai. Died in 652 A.H. Al-Fawad al-Majmu'a Sheikh Abu Ullah Muhammad Shami.
Died in 942 A.H.
Fil Ahadith.
Al-Mawzu'a Imam Shakani Yemeni.
Died in 1255 A.H.
Kitab al-Mani Hafiz Zia ud Din Masali.
Died in 623 A.H. Al-Mawzu'at al-Saraha Umar bin Badar. Al-Kashaf al-Ilahi Muhammad Sandrusi. Died in 1177 A. H. Tazkirat al-Mawzu'at Mullah Ali Qadri. Died in 1014 A. H. Al-Lawlu al-Masu Muhammad bin Khalil Kaukchi. Died in 1305 A. H. Due to these authors and their concoctions, such a calamity descended on Hadeeth which is difficult to assess. Rasulullah was one individual, and of the Hadeeth attributed to him, 99% of these are related to the period of his life in Medina, the entire span of which was 10 years. And here there arose an army of countless writers and fabricators who were inventing Hadeeth day and night. Indeed, this was the only profession some of them had.
These thousands of authors created millions of Hadeeth which they spread all around.
The few Hadeeth which were undoubtedly correct became so mixed up within this flood of lies and fabrications that it became difficult for even great critics to pick out these drops of truth from
this river of lies.
3.5 Criticism on Hadeeth. When the scholars of Hadeeth started their evaluation of Hadeeth and began to separate true from false, they kept two things in mind at that time. Firstly, the Hadeeth itself, and secondly, the narrator.
To recognize a fabricated Hadeeth, they developed the following criteria. 1. It should be against the accurate history.
2. It demeans Rafzi Sahaba, those who disagree,
or Kaji al-Bayat,
those who dissociate themselves from the family of Rasulullah.
3.
The Hadeeth should mention such an incident which could be narrated by many but was narrated by only one person. 4.
Is against the Quran.
5. Against proper intellect.
6.
Promises great rewards for very small acts, or great punishment for small sins. 7. Appears to be not credible or against probability.
Using these criteria, however,
only a small fraction of false and fabricated Hadeeth could be detected, because those who invented false Hadeeth kept an eye on all its aspects so that it could not be caught. That is why even today, despite the cross-examination of false witnesses by great lawyers, they cannot be proven to be false and are sometimes considered more trustworthy than the true witnesses. Therefore, the principles which were developed to recognize false Hadeeth are almost useless.
This is why the scholars evaluating Hadeeth put more emphasis on the credibility of the narrator. But the problem is that credibility is an internal attribute, and for this to serve as a criterion, what should serve as its basis? As far as external piety and taqwa is concerned, in this regard Muhaddisin themselves have a bitter experience about it.
Yahya bin Sa'id al-Qattan, a great scholar of evaluation, says that there is no greater liar than those who claim to be righteous and reformers. Imam Muslim says that unwitting lies come out of the mouths of even well-intentioned people. Ayub Sakhtiani praised the piety, knowledge and purity of a Nayar, but later said that even if he gave evidence about a Kajor date, he will not accept it. This is why it was necessary to base the truthfulness and credibility of a narration on its popularity and fame, i.e., except the narrations attributed to those people whose credibility among scholars was acceptable and well known. On the orders of Hazrat Umar bin Abdul Aziz at the beginning of 2nd A.H. Hadeeth started to be written in book form. Even at this time people would evaluate these, but the real scrutiny of Hadeeth started in the 3rd A.H. Most of the Imams of evaluation of Hadeeth belong to this era.
Tasamar was included among them.
It is noted in Tazkirat al-Mawzu'at. This is everything that the Muhaddisin came to understand following their verifications. Otherwise there is no way for credibility. Because logic required that what they declared correct, is in fact fabricated, and what they declared fabricated, is correct. Consequently, all the Imams of Hadeeth have accepted the state of even the most correct Hadeeth as being presumptive and have not declared it as absolutely correct. Except the one that is mutawatir and about whose very existence of being mutawatir there is doubt. whatever labels they have imposed on ahadith. For example, strong,
correct,
beautiful, acceptable, or weak, fabricated, lies and rejected. This in itself makes it clear that they were not able to reach any definite conclusion, otherwise there can only be two statuses of a narration:
true or false. Therefore whatever criticism has been levied on
ahadith, there is great room still remaining for further discussion. Allama ibn Jawza, who was known to be somewhat strict in the case of ahadith, has in his book al-Mawjuat al-Kubra, declared many ahadith given in Sunan-e-Arba and even many ahadith of Bukhari and Muslim as being fabricated. Though scholars have contradicted his assertions in the interests of the wider good,
they could not base this on any logic, apart from these being acknowledged as authentic purely by having been around for long.
Hafiz ibn Hajar, despite being tolerant on ahadith, writes that even Ibn Jawza has discarded so many fabricated narrations that another book equal to his book, of 4 volumes, could be written on them.
3.6 Impact of fabricated ahadith.
Though the Muhaddisin Imams tried to save the Ummah from these fabrications, the hold these had on the hearts of Muslims had become so strong that to this day thousands of these fabricated ahadith have the status of being the substance of deen and are deeply ingrained in their beliefs and practices. For example, there is not one from Babu al-Taharat to Bab al-Hash and Bab al-Jinnah one Nara that does not contain fabrications, but some chapters are such that they either contain only fabrications or mostly fabrications. For example, not even one hadith in Salat al-Tasbih, Salat Hajat and Salat al-Fiyah is true. It is noted in Tazakrat al-Mawzu'at that in some Sufiyana books like Qawat al-Kalab by Abu Talib Maki, or for example Ya Sarlabi, due to their misunderstanding they have called the night of mid-Shaban as Shab-e-Qadr. People started the practice of Salat al-Fiyah and in groups of tens started reading 100 rakats and began to celebrate Shab-e-Barat more than Eid, till it took the appearance of a carnival in which so much sinfulness was included that those who feared Allah would leave and go to the wilderness, for fear lest they should be overtaken by Allah's punishment. The very first practice of this occurred in Bayt al-Maqdis, Jerusalem, in 448 AH, and then spread across Syria and Egypt. Eventually the righteous scholars paid attention and by their efforts this practice was eradicated, though some part of it remained till 8th AH. Sheikh Ali bin Ibrahim has written in one of his pamphlets that the lights of Shab-e-Barat were introduced by Bahramka, who gave up Zoroastrianism to convert to Islam. They rekindled their custom of worship of fire through the deen of Islam. This gradually took the shape of fireworks which spread from east to west. For example, not one hadith quoted in Ziyara Kaaba-e-Nabi, Fazail-e-Amr-e-Arba, Fazail-e-Arab wa Zuban-e-Abi, Mazamat-e-Ashmo Zabani-Ashmi, and Fazail-e-Abdal wa Ayota wa Kutub-o-Gors, is correct. All the famous ahadith of Sophia are included in the list of fabrications. Similarly, all the ahadith given in Ulama-e Mutakalman are invented. For example, a. The ink of scholars is dearer than the blood of martyrs. One scholar is a greater impediment for Satan than 1,000 pious worshippers. b. The scholars are the heirs of the messengers of Allah. c. Or scholars of the last messengers. Are equal in stature to the messengers of Bani Israel. d. The angels spread their wings over and under the feet of the individual who goes out to seek knowledge. e. Casting a glance towards a scholar is better than 60 years of praying and fasting. Most of the ahadith given in Fazl-e-Sahaba, Munaqib-e Ala Bayt, Hadya-i Tuva ki Fazilat, Nikah ki Fazilat and Auratan ki Mada, Fazl-e Darad, and Madihi Nabi are fabrications. Imam Ahmad bin Hanbal said that there are 3 books which have no authenticity. Maghazi, Mulahim and Tafsir. Though some scholars have provided justification, in reality these sayings do not require any justification. A few ahadith in these books may prove to be credible, but these will be exceptions. All the ahadith about the divisions within the Ummah are fabrications. For example, there became 72 sects of Jews and Christians, and in the last messengers' Ummah there will be 73 sects, of which only one will go to paradise. The error in this is obvious from the visible evidence, because 73 sects of Muslims were already counted by the scholars in the 4th and 5th century A.H. After this up until today, hundreds more sects have arisen and continue to spring up. 3.7 Fabrications about the Sahaba. Though the Muhaddisin Imams and all historians agree on this, that the last Sahabi remaining in the world was Hazrat Abu at-Tufayl Amir bin Wailah, who died in Makkah in 102 A.H. These liars and fabricators created very long-living Sahaba in the later period. The following are some examples. Jabir bin Harb. Hafiz ibn Hajar writes that it was well known about him that he took part in Ghazwa-e-Kandak, Battle of the Trench.
Amir Abdul Karim bin Nasser says that I, together with Imam Nazir, had the privilege to meet him in 573
A.H. Abu Abdullah Muhammad Sakli. He lived in the 5th century A.H. It is said about him that he had shaken hands with Rasulullah, and people used to go and shake his hands as a method of seeking blessings. Kai bin Taman. He had a mark on his forehead about which it was said that a mule belonging to Hazrat Ali had kicked him. In the beginning of the 6th century A.H.
517 A.H.
Ahadith used to be narrated which were attributed to him. He lived in Gilan. Baba Ratan Hindi. Died 632 H. It is said about him that he participated in the wedding of Hazrat Fatima.
He lived in India.
All sorts of narrations were attributed in the name of these living Sahaba and were then spread among the Ummah. Some people would give high certification to these narrations and write them in their books.
There was so much inertia in the intellect of the scholars that when the Imams of Ahadith began to counter these fabrications, some people had heated arguments with them.
Imam Zabi included all the narratives of Baba Ratan among the fabrications, on which Allama Mujad al-Din became annoyed. Similarly, when Hafiz ibn Hajar declared these fabrications to be concoctions, Allama Safdi stood up to contradict him.